we justify stuff for our own reasons, not for spiritual reasons.
Okay, so we're starting with the whole concept of justification as opposed to justice. Justice being when you do things because it's right, but justification being you justify things because it fits what you want it to be. And that in itself moves us from a place of being able to separate ourselves from what we do that diminishes the humanity, that diminishes humanity as a whole, as opposed to recognizing that our actions are wrong if it in any way diminish who humanity is.
That's the same thing you just said about the detachment of the slave owner and the slave, or the person who is basically taking advantage of some indigenous tribe or some poor country for some type of monetary gain. People starving, it's the same type of detachment as far as the justice and the justification is concerned.
And I think you can see that very evident, and I want to move back to the femininity in a moment, but that's very evident when you look at European countries who has discovered oil off of their shores or on their shores, and how those natural resources serve to enhance those countries, right? As opposed to countries where people of color have found oil off of their shores or on their shores, and how it's used against them. The poverty level is very, very high. You look at a country like Chad, where the poverty level is very, very high, and you have an Exxon enclave in Chad, where the people within that enclave live quite well, and even on the outsides of it, what happens is that when they come from the outside into the enclave of Exxon, they are there. They are not allowed to leave until their work shift is over. They work long hours for a small amount of money. But if you look at a country like Norway, who found oil off this coast, and they have what, a $600 billion oil fund that they put the money in to help keep the level of poverty at a minimum, if at all. There is no poverty, come to think of it, but they don't use the money for distribution throughout the nation. They use the money to make sure that education, the health, etc., are taken care of. Wherein in other nations, it's not permitted. So what's the difference? The difference is that the idea of tribalism is perpetuated in the idea of tribalism is perpetuated in African nations and used against the indigenous people because they don't look like them, and that's the difference. So what we have to do is come to the place where we begin to see that race and gender as we see it is a distraction from where we're supposed to really be in terms of our spiritual growth. Race and gender are distractions because they keep us looking straight ahead laterally as opposed to looking up in terms of looking at a superior essence that we are. If we see gender simply based upon what your body shape and your sexual organs are, then we missed the point. Mm. We totally missed the point. But if we see gender in the physical sense as a reminder of the direction of who we are in the spiritual, meaning that gender is a reminder that we are supposed to be one entity as opposed to being separate. Every time there is a conflict between a male and a female that results in either one of the parties being dehumanized, then we have, at that point, perpetuated darkness when it comes to understanding who we are.
The issue also, piggybacking on what you said, is that if we're gonna be who we are, then what we do is who we are. In other words, we can't separate the job and say that's the work that's the job I gotta do because I gotta live. I mean, I can't say business is business and this is this. I have to live who I am, and that has to go to my job. That has to be in my politics, if you want to put it that way. It has to be in every fiber of being. And so that's what Jews did. They lived and breathed who they were, rather than saying one thing and being separate beings and living separate lives, and that's part of the oneness that has to.
And there's no accident that you say that's what they did, because that's definitely not what they do.
Right.
That's what they did, and when they did that, there was a recognition of humanity regardless of who it was. But when you move away from that, that changes.
So, is that what has happened since the Holocaust period per se? Is that they moved away from personal being business and business being personal to they're two separate, and so the rest of us kind of followed that?
They moved away from it. They stuck to it out of necessity, because before the Holocaust, leading up to it, Jews were pushed into ghettos. That's where the word ghetto originally came from. There were enclaves for Jews being pushed into neighborhoods by themselves, and that wasn't because of color of skin as much as it was because of quote unquote Catholicism or Catholic Christianity was dominating dominating Western Europe, and Judaism was seen as a bastard religion through the eyes of Catholic Christianity, and that's why they were pushed into those enclaves that we called ghettos. The whole idea of the Holocaust not only came from a religious perspective but also economics. The first thing that began to happen in Germany is that property was confiscated. So that's economics, and the accusation that Jews were manipulating and controlling the economic system came, and people bought into that. When in reality, though they accumulated property, the economic system was still being controlled by the government itself of Germany. So after the Holocaust, when the European Jews were sent back into, well, when they went back into Israel, actually they were forced because they were not going there. They actually came to the coast of this country and they refused entrance here, Britain and France. So they had to go to Israel. And when they went to Palestine, that's what it was, Palestine. When they went there, it was Great Britain, France, and the U.S. who drew the lines to set aside a country called Israel. And prior to their going, whether it was Jews, Christians, or Muslims, all of them lived next door to each other without any problems. But when the European Jews came in there, Menachem Begin began a war of terrorism against the Palestinians. And during that war of terrorism against the Palestinians, they began to take property and drive them out into the West Bank and into other areas, or the West Bank and into Gaza, the Gaza Strip. The objective during that period was to actually drive them into the ocean and take the land.
Wow.
So when you look at, as a result of that, they named it Israel, but there's never been a name real land until 1948 when that transpired. So. There was something else that I wanted to talk about before we got to that. I wanted to touch on, oh, I know what it was. When you look at the idea, it hit me, the way that father is spelled is left bet. And the way that mother is spelled is left mem. And if you look at left bet, that's the first two letters, right? And bet is a house. So out of this house, the left is housing the seed. Now, if it's left mem is mother, then everything between bet and mem is involved, is intertwined in the mother. So everything that's spiritual between left and mem is in that womb, waiting to be birthed. Can you see what I'm saying? It's in that womb, waiting to be birthed. So the question that I raise is this: do we truly understand what's beyond mem? Because mem is the middle alphabet. Do we treat the spirituality of all of what goes beyond mem? Is that because what I'm beginning to question is, are we at this point where we are in terms of the material because we have not gotten beyond mem? Because we've not gotten beyond the water. Mem is water. The physical, did we get stymied at the physical representation of spirit, which is water, and water is the source of all life on earth. Without water, you don't have, quote unquote, life in the physical, right?
Well, I think so, because we're just now at the point where we've realized the importance of the male and the feminine energy, how important it is to combine the two, first of all, that each has its role. And so, we've been so distracted with other stuff that we just really beginning that journey of really understanding.
Yeah. So when we say, when I raise the question about that, I think what am I asking? I don't know. What we need to begin to understand is what exists between left and mem. What is it that exists there? What have we brought into fruition?
Well, left is putting that pulsating spiritual seed into bet, which is the womb or the house in a sense.
Right.
Don't tie my hands. I can't think if you tie my hands. So once that happens, and if mother, like you just said, is left mem, there's a lot that happens while that seed is in that womb, for lack of a better word, germinating, being nourished, differentiating. It says to me that the woman plays a significant role in the destiny of that seed, in the way it's
the way it comes to fruition.
Yeah. What it takes to nourish that seed, to feed that seed, to impart into that seed. The feminine the masculine energy was important in that you wouldn't have had a seed. Once you have the seed, it's like the feminine energy sort of sets the destiny for that afterwards.
And it does. I can see that. So that being the case, then that is why it is so imperative that we allow, when I say allow, I don't mean we as men, but I'm talking about we as a people, allow the feminine energy to find its own level. You know, like water will find its own level. The feminine energy must find its own level, as opposed to trying to manipulate it, control it, guide it, shape it, mold it. Just let it flow. Why? Because we have tried everything we've done, we messed it up anyway. For example, I think that on the heels of what you're saying, when we look at what's taking place in the physical, when we look at what's taking place in the physical, right? We see that there is a physical move to manipulate, control, to shape, mold the female's concept of her reproductive system. Whatever, you know, when I say we, I'm talking about the masculine men are making decisions about female reproduction. Can you see that?
Yes.
Which means that they're manipulating the womb. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so what needs to be done is to allow the female to make those decisions about her womb herself. If we see those things being manipulated in the natural, that's what's happening in the spiritual. There was a spiritual, because what's happening here is a manifestation of what's happening in the spiritual. So suppose for a moment, and I really just push this out as a postulate, okay? Suppose for a moment that the obelisk, right? The thing that's shaped like the monument in DC, that's the obelisk, okay? Suppose that for a moment that the actual obelisk is a pyramid sitting on a pedestal. That's exactly what it is. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And the energy that's captured in that, right, is being manipulated in the other realm by people who know how to manipulate it.
Mm-hmm.
And is being manifested in this realm through politics, etc. Because if you really, really think about it, the people who know best how to manipulate it are the people who come out of the Vatican.
I know that.
And they're the ones who's really pushing this manipulation. Evangelicals think they're the ones who are doing it, but the genesis of it is in the Vatican. So if that's being manipulated at that level and being manifested in the physical, then we have to take some steps to deal with that, to begin to change that. Even if you look at it from the basis of the racism that's being, it's been there, but that's bubbling over now or becoming more public. Even if you look at that, the Vatican did absolutely nothing about slavery. As a matter of fact, they enhanced it. They blessed slave ships. They benefited from slavery. They justified it by deeming people of color being cursed because of the color of the skin. Not only did they do it, but most religions, they bought into the whole concept of it. So all these powers that are being manipulated are being manifested in the physical, right? So it happened earlier, and it was dealt with from a political perspective in terms of street demonstrations, legislature being passed, to change these things. But now it's different. It's being presented, and there's no political move that is able to change it. The only thing that's going to be able to change it is esoteric thought, an esoteric approach, being in places where the energy is being manipulated and taken, absorbing it, reoriented, bringing order to the confusion, bringing light to the darkness. Am I making sense? Or am I just rambling?
No, you're making sense.
Okay, can you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's not enough to sit back and argue or be angry about what we see transpiring. But the objective is to recognize what's transpiring and have a desire to alter the course of it, not for self-benefit, but alter the course of it for the benefit of everyone who exists. And I think maybe the feminine has been has been pressed down for too long, on the bottom for too long, right? And it's time now, in order to bring balance to the situation, not to put the feminine energy equal in terms of at the same place. That's what I mean by equal. I don't mean equal in the classical terms of it. To my at the same place. And maybe it's time to bring the feminine on top. And what I mean, and the reason I say that is because if I have been pressed down, then if I'm allowed to flow freely, then it appears that I flow beyond you, when in actuality I'm not. I've just found my own level. And it's not that it's superior, it's just that it takes that being on top, meaning to be exposed, meaning to be made available, meaning to be seen or be experienced at a greater degree than it ever has been. And that in itself makes it appear like that it is above and beyond the masculine. Can you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the necessity of it is to move it from, to move the feminine energy from the place of suppression to a place of prominence. And that's what I mean by going from the bottom to the top. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Now,
So from a natural perspective, is that, well, these women are just taking over and doing everything, or from a natural perspective, and I'll get to the physical, if we look at that spiritual reshifting, for lack of a better word, from a natural perspective, we think that it's women on top and taking over, but what it really is really balancing again the energies, because for so long, from a natural perspective, well, not only from a natural perspective, but spiritually also, that feminine energy has not been given credence and given or been accepted for its true role.
So, right. And so when you do that, it's not that the feminine is running everything as much as it's just being exposed to everything. Now, let's look at it, and this I've tried to understand it. Maybe I see it now. I don't know. Help me here. If you look at it from the perspective of intercourse, right? Because that's what's happening, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at maybe it from that perspective, the woman is on top. And you remember Lilith? The problem with the sages talked about that she was on top instead of being in a position at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it was Lilith. It was called Lilith because it was actually the Eve at the wrong time. You know, projecting at the wrong time.
Right.
But now it's the right time. And maybe it's time for that for her to be on top, and to be because everything comes through birth. Therefore, everything has to start with what? Intercourse. So the spiritual intercourse has to take place in that manner, and that helps me understand some things. Does that make sense?
It does.
I have a curious question. What letters spell out Eve and Lilith?
I don't know about Lilith. Eve is left. Is it left? It's Hava. Hava is Eve in the Hebrew.
Beginning of all life or something like
Yeah.
that.
But it comes from, I think it has as its root Kava. That's what I think it has as its root.
Well, Gava?
Kava. Kaya, life. Kaya, C-H-A-Y. Eve is Ket. Is that Ket? Vav Hey. Ket Vav Hey. That's Gava. Eve is actually spelled, if you spell it out, it's spelled with a C instead of E. If you spell it in Hebrew. So it's those three letters.
I'm so impressed with it that you can find that so fast.
Huh?
I'm so impressed with it that you can find that so fast.
When I finish, I'm gonna download this thing. You'll be able to do it too. I found it. Yeah. So actually, it comes from the primitive root that means also to tell, to declare, to show, to make known, or to breathe. So.
Well, that's still the source of all life.
That's right. That's right. So everything relates to breath. All of it does. So I'm thinking that when I talk about being on top, I don't want us to think about on top in terms of how we see on top. It may manifest here like that, but in the spiritual realm, it's simply an expression or an exposure that is unprecedented as we have seen it up to this point. Because every effort has been to minimize the essence of the femininity, of the feminine energy. Every effort has been done to minimize that. I mean, to the point, to the extent that if a male is dogmatic about something, then he's strong. But if a woman's dogmatic about something, then she's an irritant. You know?
She's nagging.
Yeah, always nagging. Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. Question? Yes, sir. Any questions about what I'm talking about? So what direction? The direction that we must take in dealing with this is making sure that we don't fall into the trap of following the dictates or the flow of what's in this earth realm, as opposed to being sensitive to the flow of what's in the other realm. I'll give you an example. When I made the comment that Bob is a facilitator, right? Mm-hmm. That puts her on top. You see what I'm talking about? It's in that regard, but that had to begin someplace else. So it's time for us, the male energy, the maleness, the masculine, to stop trying to dominate everything. You see, when we cease dominating everything, what happens is that we find that it is impossible for us to function on top. Even though we are accustomed to doing that, every time we get on top, something messes up. Look at the wars. Look at how things are. But if we can submit ourselves to understanding that the womb must birth everything that is that results in life itself, spiritual life. The womb must birth that. The spiritual womb must birth that. So at that point, that the womb becomes pregnant, not from the bottom, but because it's on top. Because on the bottom, when it became pregnant, it was dominated. You see? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The seed was manipulated. So the impregnation must come from a different place now. Questions? If you don't know, if you don't understand what I'm saying, just raise your hand. If you don't know how to form the question. That means that you got it. Okay.
Yeah, we just.
Okay. All right. So where do we go from here? how do we deal with this in a male-dominated society? Because how many of you, and probably all of us, are frustrated because of what you see? You know, you see the blatant racism, you see the blatant anti-feminism, you see the blatant greed, you see all of these things, right? And it frustrates you, right?
Yes.
And you begin to ask yourself, why is it that other people don't see this? Am I right?
Yes.
And the question that I ask myself is not why people don't see it, because I, you know, by virtue of my being, you know, a street organizer, people don't ever see anything. Never. They see it, don't see it. They don't want to see it because they don't want to do anything about it. My question is not why they don't see it. My question is, what do those who see it do about it? You got it?
Yeah.
Because think about it. Back in the day, you know, during the civil rights thing, people saw, but they didn't see. Everybody who walked into a courthouse saw colored-only water fountains and colored-only bathrooms and colors enter from the rear, colored window on your order at the rear of the restaurant, no colors allowed, that kind of thing. Everybody saw that, but they didn't see it in terms of dealing with it. But those who saw what it represented began to ask, what can we do about this? So now that we see what these things represent, the question that I raise is, what do we do about it?
In the macro, we talk about our understanding of what the balance should really be spiritually. And I think we're seeing more and more of it because that's what we've been doing. It's more and more of it has been exposed physically because of our spiritual take on it. And so it is what it is physically, and I think the way that we would have reacted at one point in time, and I didn't mean to say react instead of respond.
Right.
We would have reacted in the past would be, oh, woe is me, you know, the world is going to hell in a handbasket and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. That's, you know, before we started the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
We would have been in the same frame of mind as everybody else who sees, oh, what's the world coming to?
You hear this, right? That's exactly where people were before the civil rights movement started. That's how most people think. That's not how I think. Had I not been on the spiritual journey, then I would be making contact with people trying to organize against it. Trying to organize people, bring them back out to deal with this the way we did. You see what I'm talking about? That's my reaction or response to that. Because that's how I think. But the majority of the people don't think like that. They think that there's nothing we can do. So the ones who...
Or you have the Sharptons or whoever else who want to go back
Right.
to the way they used to respond to before and use the same
tactics.
Yeah, today. And that's why it just seems like it just fizzles because
It's
it's
not
not
gonna
an
work.
appropriate thing to do in this time.
Right. And the appropriate thing is what? To deal with it from the esoteric perspective, to deal with it from the spiritual perspective, to deal with from that which cannot be seen with the natural eye, but can be felt, experienced, and expressed in a different way. And the expression of it is not street demonstrations. The expression of it is understanding the spiritual ramifications and making determinations about what you want or how you want it to change. And since we don't know how we want it to change, the ultimate is to make a decision that that Father, let your will be done. Let your desires be done. Let your desires come into fruition. And the only way that the Father's desires can come into fruition is that the Father's desires and our desire become one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you make your desire one with the Father? Come on, talk to me. Not you, Bob. How do you make your desire one with the Father? How do we do that? Okay, Bob.
I don't know, Jay.
Okay, next.
Well, but I am gonna, it gives a different, not different, but we quote this all the time, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal,
Yeah.
physical, but mighty through.
Whole different perspective now. Isn't it?
Yeah. And so it literally still is a war,
Yes.
but it's a much more powerful war if we understand that.
So how do we do it? How is it that the will of the Father becomes our will? How does that happen?
Well, I think we set our desire and then let it be.
So what would the desire be?
Tell them, Sheldon.
No, because you just said it a moment ago.
For all man and woman to realize who they actually are, because if all men, man and woman actually came into the realization of who they were, the totality of what they are and who they are, then no problems or no perceived problems either would even exist.
Yeah, Mary?
All I can think of is his will.
His will. The desire is for His will to be our will. And that's what Sheldon said in 35 words.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
that's the only thing that Jehovah set out to do, was to get man to realize who he really was.
That's it.
That's the only thing he did.
Why you sound like Barry White this morning? What's
Right.
going
Because he nasally this morning.
on? Oh, you know,
I'm
I
trying.
thought it sounded
Not
like
here.
pretty smooth.
I'm trying to try something new.
Now
You
he,
use everything for your benefit.
Well, quit right now. We didn't hear you too well.
I am nasally though.
but so we do that by desiring the Father's will to be our will. Now, when you desire that, there is something else that has to take place. You have to be open to wherever it leads you. Because the desire is so new to us until it gets uncomfortable. And we miss it if we're not careful.
And if you truly have a desire for that, then that means you see that in that person too. So you can't go and try to convince someone or want something to realize something that you yourself do not believe yourself.
Neither can you look down on someone because they don't see things the way you do. Neither can you assume that something that's happened to you that you desire not to happen is going to end up being bad for you. You can't. You have to always believe, regardless of where you find yourself, what circumstance you're in, every bit of it has been orchestrated because of your desire for the will of the Father to be one with you, or you one with it. It has to be that way. Why? Because when you began to do that, then you began to see from a different perspective everything that is. You begin to see what it means to be in the world but not of the world. You begin your joy or your happiness or your sense of peace comes from a different place than where it once did. And you no longer feel, you know how some people feel better when all their bills are paid or money in their pocket than they do when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
None of that moves you. You have to get to a place where wherever you find yourself, you are, as Paul said, content. And content means you're at peace wherever you find yourself. Now, how many of you are at that place right now?
At this very moment?
Yeah. That you're content no matter where you find yourself. How many of you find yourself feeling moving in that direction to a greater degree than you ever have? You know? Because I will say that 99%. Well,
You'll never
99%.
get an agreement.
What's your name?
So you can't ask for absolutes in here. You'll never get an agreement.
Yeah. And I did it on purpose to back it down some, to walk it back. Because, you know, you won't get, I don't believe you will be absolutely at peace no matter where you find yourself all the time. There are times when you will be uncomfortable with it, but then you catch yourself and realize, you know what? I need to let this go.
Yeah.
But the more you do that, the less you have to do it. Because it becomes more instantaneous than you would think. The key to it, to all of this, in terms of the will becoming one with the will, is you cannot rely on what you see with your eyes. In other words, the bottom line is that you cannot rely on your five senses. You can't. Because your five senses will fool you every single time. Your reliance has to be on what you cannot see, what you cannot taste, what you cannot smell, etc. It has to be just the opposite of that. Because it takes five senses in order for you to survive in the physical. It takes only one eye for you to survive in the spiritual. And that's, for example, when the scripture says that, and their eyes were open, in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, I believe it is, when it says, and their eyes were open, that's not what it says. The word that's used there is ayin, A-Y-I-N. And if you look that up in the Hebrew, it says, and their eye was open. It does not say eyes. But it was translated as eyes because it was misunderstood or it was done on purpose. And if it says, and their eye was open and they realized that they were naked. So what's being said here? Their eye was open. It is not talking about eyes because at this point they're not even physical. So what happened is that up until the point where their eye was open, their will, up until the point where the eye was open, their will and the Father's will was one. But when their eye was open, they began to see all the possibilities and began to make choices. Can you see that? Based upon the possibilities that they saw.
Which had to happen.
Otherwise there's no free will. Because nakedness talks about being crafty. Talked about being deceitful. And if man does not depend on his craftiness now to get ahead, what does he get? You see? And right now, one of the most difficult things that we have to conquer when we began to talk about the spiritual, we began to talk about the eye as opposed to the eyes, is to move beyond our craftiness, our intellect, to let it go. And begin to see it from the spiritual perspective, to begin to see it through the eye as opposed to seeing it through the eyes. What I have found difficult to do, and still in the process of learning how to do it, is to read the scripture with my eye, not my eyes. And when you read the scripture with the eye instead of the eyes, that is when you begin to see things that, like, okay, look at this word eyes. Then you find out it's eye. Then when you begin to see it with your eyes, instead of your eyes, you make an immediate connection. If your eye is dark, then your whole body is dark. That's what Jesus, you remember?
Mhm.
So you begin to make those kinds of connections. He never talked about eyes. He talked about eye.
Do you want to explain, or would you please explain some more about the eye?
The eye of which I speak is represented in the physical body as the pineal gland. And that is and it's called the eye, not because it sees as though, like our eye. Well, our eyes actually don't see. You don't see with your eyes. You actually see with your brain. Your eyes simply let the light in, the natural light in, and the image is projected to the brain, and that's how you see. Now, in the spiritual realm, the light not only comes in, but the light also emanates from that eye, and it allows you to see what exists in the other realm. And when I say what exists, I don't mean in a physical sense. And it is almost at a point where you have to experience it for yourself in terms of the seeing in order to grasp what I'm trying to say in reference to the eye as opposed to the eyes that we have. I think the eyes in the natural are indicative of a split vision. It reminds us that our vision is split in the earth realm when it should not be, because we see glimpses of the spiritual, but more of the natural. And all of us know that the eye of which we speak is real in terms of seeing, because when we make a choice to see into the other realm, we close our natural eyes. When we want to see, we close our eyes. So why do we do that? We talk about light bulb moments. We talk about I had a flash, a flash of what? Of enlightenment.
But you're right, you can see when you close your eyes. But a lot of times when you talk, I'll close my eyes and I can envision, I can see
You can see what I'm saying,
what you're saying.
but you don't see images like people.
Right.
But you see what I'm saying. So understanding comes through the third eye, shutting down the distractions.
So how is that like with Jesus when he said, I see what my Father does?
I see what my Father says.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's the same thing.
Same
That's what
thing.
you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing.
Okay.
See, the distraction, we talked about earlier, distractions being, racism, economics, etc., right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are distractions that you see after you get beyond the obvious distractions. The obvious distractions is your job. It's the things going on around you. It's the telephone ringing. It's a program on TV. Those are obvious distractions. And if you have not gotten beyond those obvious distractions yet, then either you haven't been listening or you haven't had the desire to move beyond where you were. Because when you have a strong enough desire to move beyond where you were, by now, you should be able to shut out those natural, those obvious distractions with ease.
So that's what meditation is just seeing. It's not?
Meditation is, when you read the word meditation, and he meditated on them day and night, meditations talk about a single focus.
Okay.
That's what it's talking about. It is talking about unmitigated focus on the essence of light.
Okay.
Because when you talk about word is talking about a combination of spiritual energy to form something. Can you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Word is a combination of spiritual energy that forms something. Because each letter that makes up the word is a form of spiritual energy. And it comes together to form something. So when it talks about things having been spoken into being, is bringing those energies together in a place and speaking what you desire them to be. In other words, you are shaping it and making it be what you want it to be. And that's how we create out the world that we live in. If your attitude is bad, the world you live in is going to be the same. So when you change your attitude, you change the world that you live in. Now, there's always confusion trying to enter the world that you live in, but you're the one who has to deal with that. It's not up to me to keep confusion out of your world.
Right.
It's up to you to keep confusion out of your world. That's not something for me to do. If I am the one to keep confusion out of your world, then I am doing something that the Father's not going to do. He's not going to force himself on you. You open yourself up to that desire. Now, if you call me and say, you know, this is taking place, like there's confusion in your world, now I can assist you in doing that. But for me to just run around constantly doing that, that's not going to happen. I have too many issues to deal with on my own. You know, to be halted, to be in a place where, you know, where I do that constantly. Any other questions? Or any questions, I should say. Okay, so it's something a lot of what I have talked about, you know, in the last few moments are things that I saw clarity from that I saw in the last couple of days. I didn't have any clarity on why some things happened the way they did, but I began to get clarity as I sat here and began talking this morning. I see a lot of stuff that brought some sense of clarity, which also tells me that in recognizing the position of prominence that must be given to the feminine, it also tells me that we are on the precipice of entering a gateway that very few men has ever entered. Very few. Because there have been very few men in the history of mankind who were willing to step back from self and selfishness and allow the feminine energy to be what it was created to be. Very few have done that. So I think that we're on the precipice of entering a gateway far greater, not great in terms of significance and insignificance, but far greater than the gateway we entered in on 11/11.
If it's that hard for men to do that, how hard is it for women to allow the masculine side of themselves to step back? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying.
Because
It is very,
the culture that we're
so when
in
you
and
put
all
them up,
that.
they don't become dominant.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm just like, how can we more fully be who we're supposed to be in light of how we've been conditioned?
How can the women embrace their feminine
Femininity.
instead of this masculine that they've been holding on to? Because that's the only
Where
place
they
that
could
they
have
found
survived
work.
or,
Right.
yeah.
By virtue of what we're doing now, by virtue of us talking about it, if I feel like it is necessary, and I really do, necessary for me to minimize the who I am in terms of the masculine, or what I represent, I should say, in terms of the masculine, then and you hear that, and it makes sense to you, and it resonates with you. Now you're saying, well, I need to step up, but I have to be careful not to make the same mistake. By being in that position, I'm going to say something, and I don't want to get any more explicit than I'm going to get, and I hope you get it. Okay. One of the most difficult things for a male to deal with is his performance sexually, or lack thereof. You understand that? And when a man can come to grips with that, then he begins to realize it's not about me dominating, it's about me augmenting, or being one with, as opposed to the prowess that we put in our heads. Can that make sense? Mm-hmm. And when you submit, you find that the female does not necessarily beat you over the head with that. So when I talk about being on the top instead of the bottom. What I'm talking about is that it may be necessary for you to become on the bottom sexually in order for you to perform. I don't mean physically, sexually, but in recognition, minimizing the thing that makes you a man is your sexual prowess. The thing that makes you a man is recognizing and respecting not only who you are, but also that what makes you what you are. And that is also feminine energy. Because without the feminine, you wouldn't be who you are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if that is the case, then that has to be brought into being, manifested in the physical before it can be realized in the spiritual. And men, so therefore, in the physical, men's attitude has to change when it comes to that. Does that make sense?
It sounds like you're saying men need to be able to receive.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. If I repress the feminine you, right, then I'm also repressing the feminine me. So I'm not receiving. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But if I respect the feminine you, then everything you receive from me, I'm very careful. I want it. My desire for it, for what you receive from me, is something that's going to enhance you. So now, I am also respecting the feminine me, so I can receive from you, from the masculine you. Does that make sense?
But you only get to that point when you understand the original reason why man needs woman and woman needs man. Meaning, the helpmeet was created to not only assist Adam, but also to not resist, but be the component to say, okay, you know you weren't right. In other words,
right.
Not only to assist him when he's doing the will of the Father, but also to call it to his attention.
The
To
challenge.
oppose him and challenge him
Yeah.
when he's not.
Right.
And the thing that we do is we get it off balance, and we become that nagging woman when we go so far that we get it off balance, that the wall is built so that there's that resistance to hearing it all. And so the true thing is to get it balanced. And so if we understood that to start with, then it wouldn't matter whether I'm giving or receiving right now. It's the timing of what's going on in our lives. And at times it's more appropriate for me to give, and at times it's more appropriate for me to receive. It's just that balance, that dance of balance.
Yes, and that's that. I think that's pretty much what you were asking. How do you make sure that you don't overdo the masculine?
I know this is not always the case,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like nagging happens when men are not receptive.
I agree.
I don't.
I think so too.
And it probably depends on how you define the word, but I mean, I struggle with that word because it's just.
I think a lot of nagging also occurs when a woman is trying to get her way.
That's what I mean.
You see what I'm talking about?
Innocence.
Well, the difference is intent.
Always intent.
Yes.
The difference is always intent. You see, with me, and I can only speak of me, I've learned over the years to listen the first time and hear what's being said as opposed to hearing what I want to hear. That makes all the difference in the world. Now, what I also have learned is that every opportunity that presents itself for me to defer to the feminine, take it. Take it. Why? Because most of the time, when you make that difference, whatever the circumstance is, she'll sort through it. But most of the time, we don't. That's in the natural, of course.
But why?
The why is because we think we already know.
Well, and see, the other thing is that the bina, the aspect of understanding
Yeah.
is that you can differentiate. You can look at several things and go through the process of, okay, which is the best one, and that's the feminine aspect that
Yeah.
helps to do that. Women tend to look at different. We need the seed, but we tend to look at, okay, different scenarios for lack of a better word. If we do this, then this.
Right.
If we do this, then this. If we do this, then
And
this.
I also think that we got to know where to draw the line. And I don't mean to draw a line, a hard line. I'm talking about maybe a broken line, dotted line that's malleable. And the reason I say that is because I'm a caterer. I'll cater to female in a heartbeat. I have no issues with that, but not to the point of male weakness. Because most females cannot deal with a weak man.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to cater to the point where, you become a yes man. But I'm talking about cater to the point where you express through what you are doing for her, to her, with her, on her behalf, that no matter what, I am with you. That's what I mean by when I say catering. I don't mean,
Yeah.
Hat in hand catering. I don't mean that at all. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Even if what I agree to do with for in her presence becomes a mistake on her part, rather than say, you messed up, I don't do that. I say, okay, well, we can work through this too. We can deal with it. And we work through, you see what I'm talking about? And what happens is she becomes someone who does the same thing because she's receiving that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Because women give what they receive. If the male is, and I'm speaking in terms now of physical manifestations, right? If the male at home is always minimizing your worth or minimizing your suggestions or minimizing you as a female, then you're going to find someone who doesn't.
Yeah.
You're going to draw that because that's what you desire.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, it also causes you, if you suppress it and don't deal with it, to have a stinking attitude. You see? Sister, you have to deal with those things. Now, if you look at it from the spiritual, that's exactly what happens when we began to see how it is very difficult for man and woman to coexist, to get along. Why is it that you think that the divorce rate exceeded the marriage rate? That's a manifestation, that's a physical manifestation of something being wrong in the spiritual when it comes to imbalances of energy. There's something wrong with that. Now, what changed it when the bottom fell out the economy, divorce rate went down. It wasn't because people cared about each other, because they couldn't afford to leave each other. Yeah, economics again. So the God of this world, you see? So nothing really changed. But it gave us pause. So now we have an opportunity to change the discourse. So that when we put it in the macro, we can begin to see differently the reason people are together as opposed to just being there for economics. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. It gives us an opportunity to change the discourse. And change it we must. And I know that there are people who probably will listen to this broadcast and feel like that's arrogant to say, but regardless of what they think, it doesn't matter anymore. The reality is this: we create our own world. And the way we create our own world is by combining the letters, the energy letters, and speaking, and that's what brings it into fruition. If I want to create a world of anger, then I become angry. And I speak angry things. If I want to create a world of selfishness or greed, then I become greedy. And then I began to attract other greedy people around me. You see? And we began to justify each other. So we bring those things into fruition. Now, if we are open to the will of the Father, then the will of the Father chooses. Because we allow the Father to choose. No different than our children are grown. They're adults. And if they allow me, they ask me something, then they're allowing me to make decisions or help them make decisions or feed into their lives. You see that?
Yes.
So the Father, because we allow the Father to guide us, chooses the masculine and the feminine energies that the Father chooses to bring together in order to bring in order to birth something new into the atmosphere, so that both feminine and masculine will have access to it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Can you see that? The Father makes those choices, and we don't make those choices. Because if we were to make those choices, we will make the same mistakes, because we choose each other on the basis of selfishness 9 times out of 10. What we want, not what's going to benefit mankind. That's how we choose them. But when the Father brings it together, the choice is made only because we're willing. And when we're willing and that choice is made, then what results is a benefit for mankind, so that man can begin to see differently the role. And I say man, I'm talking about generically, of course. That you can begin to see differently the role that must be carried out in order for us to journey to beginning. Can you see that? We don't make those choices when you open yourself up. And I purposely do my best not to make those choices, because I am keenly aware of how easy it is to be selfish. It's very easy if you don't watch yourself to be selfish. It's very easy to do things because you feel like you want to do it, as opposed to doing things because it's the right thing to do. Even if it doesn't feel right, you know it's right. And the thing that usually makes it uncomfortable or cause it not to feel right is because of misinformation that we have been receiving all of our lives. So when we began to uproot this misinformation or disinformation, it is at that point that our lives began to change for the better. We were earlier, Vermel and I were talking about something before we got started, and one of the things we were talking about was the idea of charter school. And I made the statement that I don't agree with charter schools either. But if we don't begin to do something in that direction, the children are going to begin to lose. Because the powers that be have as a goal to leave African American and Hispanic kids in public school with no money. And put all the money in charter schools. Now, it is easy for some people to look at the opportunity for a charter school as an opportunity to make some money. As an opportunity to get in on the ground floor and make some money off of this. As opposed to looking at it as an opportunity to move people to a place of spiritual understanding through a mechanism that is set up for their bad. That is, take what's set up for the bad and make it for their good. Can you see that? And that's very necessary.
Well, that's incredible that you'd be given the tools to teach people to think again. That is the most dangerous thing they could have done.
And they don't realize it.
No.
It's like it's self-imposed disaster.
But isn't that?
One second, babe.
I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is that you come to a point where you are so viciously opposed to something or someone or a group of people, until you lose all sight of reality, and you will do anything to stop them. And the anything that you end up doing is the very thing that propels them forward,
Well,
opens their minds.
There's the assumption that there is no one like us who would make a difference.
Right.
Start a school and do something different.
Because
They can't even conceive of that.
because we never finish anything we start.
No, you said it.
Okay. So if you can take that and make it applicable to, you know, many other things, the whole idea, as Denise so aptly pointed out, is it is necessary for people to be in an environment where they're taught to think again. See, this is the thing. If you are not taught to think, you will not open the eye, the pineal gland, the third eye. You will not open it. You have to think. In other words, you have to be able to think about the things around you before you can begin to even consider the things beyond your natural environment. And when you begin to consider things beyond your natural environment, that's what opens the third eye, the pineal gland. That's what causes it to begin to function again. Thinking. Because guess what? If we are thought, then it is thought that keeps us living, isn't it? How many times have we said, boy, if I can't think, I'll just die. I'll just dry up. I have. You know?
Sorry.
I have. Something wrong with me? Okay. But I have to think, I have to have opportunity to be exposed to things I don't understand.
I think, therefore.
I am Rene Descartes. Yeah.
Who was referring to the pineal gland? Who was referring
Yes,
to the pineal gland?
right. And in actuality, I don't know whether he realized it or not, but what he was actually saying, I think, therefore I am the I am. And if we can, since some folk don't think they're driving, they don't think.
Speaking of, I think, getting back to this thing about nagging, because I feel a little bit of discomfiture in terms of, you know, what came first, the chicken or the egg. And I think you say women nag because they want to get what they want.
Sometimes.
But I think women learn to use that to get what they want. But I think in the beginning, it came about because women were not taught to think and they were not heard. So they had to develop some way that they felt like they had to force themselves on something or somebody to be heard, even though it didn't work out like they thought it would. But I think it was a way of trying to be heard.
A system of being heard. And I can buy into, I can agree with that. I can agree with that. And it does make sense that because women were not heard, and to a great extent still
Right.
are not heard, unless it's something that I agree with.
Right.
Yeah. I have. If it's something I want, then I always hear you. But if it's something contrary, I never hear you. And again, we can also take that too far, in that we just become, you know, subject to whatever whim. It has to be balance in that. There's got to be balance in that. Huh?
Men don't nag. Men are persistent. Women nag.
It,
It's just,
there are
it's
some.
on my skin.
Yeah, there are some men who do nag. I don't mind they nag. They-
Yeah, but it's not common. You know what I mean? For people to say that a man is nagging you. You know what I mean? He might be bothering you. He might be persistent, but he's not nagging you. Only women nag.
What's the difference?
I'm just saying the word itself is sexist.
Yeah, the
That's
word is
all.
a very different
Yes,
connotation.
very negative, very demeaning
Yeah.
word.
So where did it come from?
Yeah.
Men. That's what you expect.
So if you're not a source.
I mean, yeah, it came from
I
men.
know, I just
You
get
know,
all
so-
bothered. You're right.
Well, look
Now,
at
you know,
the
nagging
devil.
is not
The devil
necessarily
turned
verbal. Now.
into a hag, a nag, a witch, or whatever.
Yeah, and it is not
Down
necessarily
through the
verbal
ages.
either. Some women nag with their eyes.
I don't know where that came from.
They'll be looking at you. I'm not,
That's a matter of perception.
I'm not gonna, that's my reality. I'm not gonna tell you to do it again. Did I tell you to cut the grass? You're walking in. Then you walk up to the window and look at the grass. But it works. But you're right, Audrey. It's simply because women have never been given an audience. And when I say never, I mean never. I'm not overstating it. Because regardless of what she says, she's not heard.
What about Oprah?
She may be, you
What
know,
about Oprah?
huh?
On the phone, someone said.
What about Oprah?
What about her? Is Oprah heard? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
No, not by men. Men, when Oprah got her TV channel, it was men in power who said that that should have never happened. It was men who really felt like Oprah was bad for the country, was a negative entity in this country, had negative impact on young women, especially in this country. And when I say men, I'm talking about the men who run everything, white men. Those are the ones from whom these kinds of statements came. So when I say not heard, we as African American or Hispanic men, for that matter, we mimic the master in terms of our not hearing, our not listening. So Oprah has a forum, but the forum matters not if nobody pays you attention. You know, she made a lot of money talking, but who was her primary audience? Women. Women, not men. So that's what we're talking about. Who am I talking to? Ring?
That's ringing.
Okay, I thought so. I'm gonna call you later on today anyway.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that's, you know, that's one of those things where she speaks, but men still don't hear. And we're talking primarily about men beginning to develop not a listening ear as much as a listening heart. You know, feel it, sense it. You know what I'm saying? You can hear it audibly, but when you hear it with your heart, that's when you really hear it. That's when you really respond to it, as opposed to dismissing it. And then we're so fragile too, men. We can be so fragile. You hurt my feelings. Especially if you tell them how to do something, you show me wrong on the spot. And I mean, you know, I guess I'm one of the few. I don't care if you show me where I'm wrong, then that means we get it better. You know, we do better next time.
Right.
That is an excellent point, though, because I don't think men are supposed to be that fragile. They got that way because they sequestered themselves from the other half of their being.
Yes, I agree with you. And also, I will say this as well, that we're moving into an era when it's just not the opposite, but far worse. If you notice how young females are rearing their young boys, they treat them like toys, like puppies. They raise them, and these boys get grown and they have no respect for females at all.
Yes.
That's even worse. So things always get worse before it gets better. It's always the darkest before the dawn. That's just the way it is. So why is that? Because people don't see a need to change unless things get unbearable. Change is not something that you wake up in the morning and say, I'm gonna do this. Change is something that comes upon you out of necessity most of the time.
You know.
Okay, where am I? Where are we?
Back to what you started with, you talked about when you said something about the letters from Mem to Tav,
Yeah.
everything that you've said is the reason why we haven't gotten,
Beyond Mem.
yeah, and I'm not talking about the letters themselves.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Essence of what
Yeah,
it
yeah.
means.
Right.
Because even the Mem in the woman's name is water translates into spirituality.
Right.
So when the balance is right, and when you've got two entities who are interacting together and each giving and taking appropriately, then what gets nourished is that spirituality, that spiritual component of
So-
the seed. And so when
That's
that
interesting.
spiritual component of that seed gets nourished, then everything else beyond that sort of takes care of itself in a sense, or the journey is set for that child to continue to ask the appropriate questions. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. Something clicked when you said that. When we get beyond Mem, when that nourishment takes place, we get beyond Mem. That's the only way we get truth, the purity of truth. Because left Mem Tav, truth, is truth. So we get the only way we get beyond that is for the nourishment to take place in the womb of the feminine energy. And if you think about it, Mem, water, baby, embryonic fluid, water, so everything comes out of that. All life comes out of that. So there's no accident, no coincidence that the Mem, left Mem is mother. There's no coincidence. It has everything to do with the essence of the letters, and getting beyond that to the place of the essence of what truth really is has to come as a result of respecting the feminine energy for what it is, and as a result of recognizing that not only is left the beginning of the father, but left is also the beginning of the mother. So both of them have the same beginnings, but different roles to play, which is recognized by Bet and Mem.
But the roles are complementary.
Very much
They
so.
have to be complementary
Very much so.
in order to produce the spiritual seed.
And complementary does not mean same size. It does not mean equal in terms of what we talk about equal. Complementary means exactly what it is. It complements whatever is necessary to propel it forward.
Complementary means when I need more, when my husband or my helpmeet needs to receive than I have to give. When I need more giving than he gives.
And you know what's
Well,
funny?
you know.
I know what you're talking about. The thing, funny thing
Whatever
about-
I need, when I
Complementary
need, and
angles
whatever
are
he needs.
two
he
angles
needs.
that measure 90 degrees. It doesn't matter if it's 10 and 90 or 20 and 80. They're still complementary as long as they measure 90 degrees.
Yes. Thank you. Minus a lady.
As long as they measure 90 degrees.
Yes,
As long as they
they're
measure 90
complementary,
degrees.
yeah.
They can be 70, 30, 20, 80, 60, 40, doesn't matter.
See what I'm talking about? Am I the only one? Am I the only one? Huh? There's some other people who just have to think too, right? Okay. So the move from where we are is to recognize that there is absolutely no chance of us moving to beginning without recognizing how imperative it is for us to become complementary rather than dominating. Because there's nothing in Scripture that tells us to dominate each other, but it talks about thoughts. Dominate the thoughts. Think about it this way. The feminine, the womb from which Adam was made, from it came a mist. Remember that?
A what?
Mist.
Okay.
Came up from the earth. Right? From the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the mist that watered the ground, right?
Yeah.
But when males and females got so far apart in terms of complementing each other, they got so entangled in selfish lust, eat, drinking, being married at the time of Noah. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It is then that the womb of the ground dried up and had to be watered from the outside. The rain fell. So that's a sense of the barrenness of the womb. The womb no longer nourished itself or watered itself, because it is from the water that all life comes, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it died. Not died in the sense it didn't exist anymore. It died in the sense that its function was minimized. So in order to keep it functioning, it had to come from another source. It, meaning the water, had to come from another source. And that other source was the clouds from the heavens, from enlightenment. So now the womb is watered from enlightenment as opposed from within. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that poses another question for me then.
Okay.
When we talk about all the earth groans for man to get together,
Yeah.
does that mean then that when we truly understand our roles and we become that role, that means the great Sahara will start to sprout life again? I mean, is there a manifestation of the physical? I know that there is in the physical. It's spiritual, but if the physical is if physical is sort of an example of what's happening in the spiritual. I mean, you got all these places with droughts and dried up and things like that. When we get it right, does the earth get it right again?
Well, yes. When we just right now, if our thought patterns, if our desires were in sync, in rhythm with, then we could desire for the Sahara to produce life, and it would, in terms of foliage. And it would, because there is life in the Sahara, but for different types. It would. We could desire for the drought to end, and it would. Because in reality, the drought in the land is actually a recognition of the drought in man's thinking in relationship to the spiritual. Because the more if you look at the pattern, you probably could draw a line from the time when the moral majority began to take the spiritual and make it political. How everything in terms of climate began to change because our thoughts began to change. So that the drought and the thought of the spiritual began to manifest in the natural. So when we change those thoughts, then all of that begins to change as well. So we are not primarily, but we are totally responsible for everything that happens in this thing we call Earth realm. We are responsible for that. And one of the ways that the adversarial thought has been able to continuously dominate is because it has convinced us that this God who sits high and looks low is the only one who can change it. And it's the devil who is low is the one who caused it. You see? So when we recognize that it's the devil who caused it is us in our thoughts, and the God who brings it back in balance is us, as opposed to the God who sits high and looks low. It's one of the things that I think I made a mention of it last week. Eloah. Eloah is the singular of Elohim. So if the scriptures had intent to say that in the beginning, or beginning created God, meaning one, right? Singular. It would have said Eloah as opposed to Elohim. So it's an intent to say Elohim, which tells me that though we are Elohim, there is no way that we can bring things into order without cooperation of more than an individual. One, more than the Eloah. It has to be Elohim who does it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And I believe that when Barbara talks about all creation crying out for us to get it right, I believe that men as a whole don't like the position they're in. They just don't know what to do about it. And when we talk about, well, I don't see how come they can't see it, well, they don't have anything to compare it to. So they don't know what to desire. But when the more we began to put it out there into the macro and they began to pick it up, then they began to develop a desire or get an inkling of what to desire. Can you see that? It's like, if I tell you, if I offer you some, pate, chicken, pate, you might not know what that is. You say, I don't like that, but you haven't experienced it, but once you experience it, it may be the best thing you ever had. So if you don't know what to desire, it's because you have not had an experience in order to desire. So that's, and we're so fickle in that our manifestation of being afraid to change is our fear of moving into new areas or trying new things. Think about it. There are people who, no matter how many times they go out, they go order chicken. Yeah.
Well, in certain places.
They go order chicken.
Yeah,
I don't care what else. I don't care what, but you don't know what you get.
Yeah.
You really don't. Because depending on where you are,
That's what I
and
said.
who is preparing it, you don't know what you get. But see, I ain't talking about that. I'm saying I don't care where they are. They order chicken.
I got you.
They go to the fish cabinet or chicken.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. But because of fear of change.
Yeah.
Or you have people who will tell you, as a matter of fact, I don't like that. How do you know you don't like it?
Right.
You've never experienced it. And that's what happens with people who maybe look at some of these broadcasts. I don't like that. You don't know what you don't like because you're not thinking about it. Think about what's being said. Think about what's being experienced before you make that decision about whether or not you like it. That's important. There are people who will look at a title and say, I don't want to know about that. You don't even know what it's about. So how you know you don't want to know? You don't know. If I look at a title and it catches my eye, I want to know what it's about. Because I remember when I was told there were certain things you don't read because it gets in your spirit. It get all down in you. And I'm like, well, I'm going to see.
You wanted to.
So I would read all kinds of stuff. 'Cause I figured that you don't have a right to talk about something in an adversarial way or positive way if you don't know what it's about. How are you going to speak about it if you don't read it? So those are things that really keeps us in the place where we are, keep us stuck. It keeps us stuck. And my encouragement has always been, if it's out there, read it. If you feel uncomfortable, stop. But read it. That's the only way you're going to understand it.
Just by the nature of it, the only way you can understand anything is to understand the opposite of it as well.
That's it. That's the reason there is a thing called discovery or exculpatory evidence in a trial. You got to know what's against your client so you know how to deal with your client. But if you don't ever read, if you don't ever receive the evidence, then you don't know what you're up against. So I read Buddhism. I read the Satanic Bible. Everything that I wasn't supposed to read, I read. Because I believe that that's how you understand things. That's how you teach yourself to think. The only way that you can make a rational decision about what you believe is to read things that you think you don't believe. That's it.
And if you never do that, then everything you do is just dogma.
Yes.
Something outside of you told you to believe to do it.
So, questions? Okay. Are we done? Are there any questions online, Shelby?
No.
Okay. All right. If there aren't any, then let me say this before we start recording. We will not be here next week. Well, we will be in Philly. So those of you who are on the phone and those of you who are watching the broadcast, our effort, we will put forth every effort to broadcast next Friday, or record next Friday rather, and then put it up, upload it so that you can view it next week, but we will not be here next week. Okay? That's it. Robert.
The light of the truth and the truth of the light gives us to know and see who we are and what we do.
Amen. All right, telephone people, broadcast people, see you later.